and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin in Somalia, where members of parliament have elected Sheikh Adan Madobe as the Speaker of the country's lower house of parliament. Mr. Madobe's election comes a day after the upper house re-elected its Speaker. The election of speakers is a crucial step towards the conclusion of the country's long-drawn-out electoral process. The new parliamentary leaders are expected to spearhead the process of electing the country's next president, which must be done by the end of May. Mr. Madobe previously held the Speaker's position for 2 years, from 2007, during the transitional administration of the late President Abdullahi Ahmed. Uhuru Kenyatta has urged armed groups in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo to lay down their arms and work with government in nurturing peace and stability. The representatives of armed groups are meeting in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, for direct talks with DR Congo's officials. More than 20 groups are said to be represented. The talks are part of resolutions passed at a recent summit of East African heads of state. A statement from the summit said groups that won't participate in the talks will be dealt with militarily. East African heads of state have, however, agreed to deploy a joint military force to eastern DR Congo to deal with the armed groups operating in that region. The special envoy of the UN Secretary General for the Great Lakes region has told the Security Council that he sees encouraging trends in terms of dialogue and a continued will to go after the root causes of instability. Wang Jie says his office will continue supporting the efforts of the countries in the region in combating impunity and promoting human rights, in particular the work being done by the Judicial Cooperation Network. Also addressing the Council, the Executive Secretary of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region highlighted the various security challenges emanating mainly from activities of armed groups operating in parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and Republic of South Sudan.
Islamist terrorists is faced with various security challenges emanating mainly from activities of negative forces and armed groups operating in parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, the Central African Republic, and the Republic of the South Sudan. On the security front, the DRC is facing a resurgence of attacks by armed groups, rebel forces, and Islamist terrorists who are sowing terror by massacring and abducting civilians, burning villages, etc., particularly in the eastern part of the DRC.
In the past, insecurity in the Great Lakes was largely confined to the region itself. Conflict there, however, is today increasingly interconnected to dynamics in other parts of the continent. While the use of force should eventually constitute an important component in any exercise to neutralize armed groups in eastern DRC, it is crucial that all interested parties first work together to help implement DRC's strategy on the demobilization of armed groups and rebuild and consolidate trust between DRC's neighbors themselves. Without these ingredients, foreign military intervention might simply create a cascade of second-order problems on the ground that Kinshasa's authorities might struggle to cope with.
Situation in Sudan's Darfur, the UN High Commissioner has called on the Sudanese authorities to protect the population of West Darfur and take urgent steps to prevent further outbreaks of communal violence after more than 100 people were killed in attacks by armed assailants between the 22nd and 24th of April. At least 151 people were killed, including at least 27 women and 17 children, and more than 90 injured over the weekend. 3 people were reportedly killed inside a hospital, including 2 medical workers. The violence has also spread to El Geneina, the capital of West Darfur.
We are appalled by reports that 159 people were killed in Kerenik on the 22nd and the 24th of April. Thousands have been displaced and at least 107 injured. 5 villages in the region were attacked. We're concerned that this region continues to see repeated serious incidents of intercommunal violence with mass casualties. While initial measures taken by the authorities to calm tensions are welcome, we urge them to address the underlying causes of violence in the region and to fulfill their responsibility to protect the population. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights urges the authorities to ensure that the many people injured in Karenik who have not yet received medical care do receive this care promptly and facilitate humanitarian assistance for the displaced. We also call on the Sudanese authorities to conduct prompt, thorough, impartial investigations into these attacks and to hold all those responsible to account in line with international human rights law. The victims and their families have a right to effective remedy. We urge them to accelerate the long-delayed implementation of the security measures set out in the Juba Peace Agreement.
Meanwhile, the United Kingdom's ambassador to the United Nations, James Kariuki, says violence is preventing humanitarian aid getting to those in need. The British diplomat says the UN has had to suspend food distribution in West Darfur as a result of the increase in violence affecting at least 62,000 people.
We discussed the latest situation at the request of the UK, the USA, France, Ireland, Norway and Albania. Violence is increasing in Darfur, and this is the second time in 5 months that the Karenik town has seen a deadly wave of attacks. The violence is preventing humanitarian aid getting to those in need. OCHA has had to suspend food distribution in West Darfur, affecting at least 62,000 displaced people. We take note of the response of the Sudanese authorities, but without serious investment in local peacebuilding and justice, a unified security presence, disarmament and land reform, we worry the gains made by years of investing in peace could be quickly reversed.
Back here in West Africa, military rulers in Burkina Faso and Guinea have asked West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, for more time to present democratic transition timelines after missing a Monday deadline. Regional leaders last month told the interim military governments of Guinea and Burkina Faso they had until April the 25th to explain how and when they would hand back power to civilians or they would face immediate sanctions. Neither complied, citing realities on the ground that made it difficult to organize elections. Both countries risk a new round of economic and financial sanctions. International Affairs analyst Paul Ejime joins us now on the program for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you, Teniola, for having me.
So Guinea and Burkina Faso missing this deadline set by ECOWAS. Does this come as a surprise to you?
So, not really. If you remember the background to this, when the ECOWAS leaders held a summit and then gave them this deadline. It was in March, 22nd. They had actually invited them to the summit, but for some reason they didn't attend. So that is the military rulers. And the two countries are playing with their own time. I think Burkina Faso is talking about 3 years. They are still consulting. The same thing for Guinea. So it is a case of, and ECOWAS, for itself, cannot now impose the kind of sanctions it has imposed on Mali, which is controversial. And then a court in UEMO has actually said that it is illegal. So ECOWAS is now bidding its time, I think, from what I heard from diplomatic sources, ECOWAS Commission will be sending missions to these countries to help them because they can no longer go hard. It's a kind of a way of changing tact, if you like.
Yeah, and that leads to my next question. Should ECOWAS rethink its approach to coups? Are sanctions the answers to coups? How else can they deter this trend?
I think good governance is the panacea. Good governance is the answer to the solution. Military rule is not the answer either. So the leaders, they should be rulers. They are leaders, not rulers, should be able to deliver. on the so-called dividends of democracy, human rights, hold credible elections, respect the rights of the people, respect the constitution, the grand norm, the electoral laws of their country, and then improve the conditions of their people. I think that is the only way to stop this, the agitation, because normally it starts with agitation, that then street protests, which normally the governments in power will suppress. And then the next thing you have is a military taking power, because they have the instruments, they have weapons. Otherwise, it starts with the civilian, the disaffection, and suffering, poverty, unemployment, disease, lack of infrastructure, no electricity, no roads, no water, no hospital. These are the basics. I'm trying to bring them down to the common man's language. These are the things you want. When these are given, you don't need to bother about who sits in the city capitals or say nation's capital in terms of government. Deliver. If you deliver, because that's the promise they usually make, but they often fail to do so. And that is the reason it starts with people protest, then will now lead into the military coming back now to seize power.
But speaking about the response, do you think regional bodies like ECOWAS and also the African unions, do you think they've done enough in their response in deterring this trend?
I think like the leaders, the individual leaders from these countries, these regional organizations and continental have also failed the people. They have failed in terms of the fact that there are instruments for checkmating the excesses of those who are leading. For instance, when some of them are going for third term, tenure elongation, changing the constitution in a very illegal way, or holding elections that are flawed, you expect an organization like ECOWAS to call these people to order, or AU to do so. But what happens is that they often come when the horse has bolted out of the stable, and they lack the courage to tell themselves the truth. What stops in peer review, for instance, if a colleague is not behaving properly, what stops you from raising an alarm and calling them? You say, Teniola, listen, what you are doing, we are friends, but what you are doing here is wrong. And that is when these organizations are failing to do so. And that is why it appears that the military is now, and if their care is not taken, and this is not being a prophet of doom, you may have more military governments coming up. The military will strike because the civilians, the politicians have failed. So I think the solution is for them to deliver on good government. Stop corruption, stop nepotism, stop cronyism, or favoring people because of where they come from, because of their maybe because they are from your region, your ethnic group, or your political group, or religion. Just be fair. Rule with open mind and deliver. This defense law and order, no matter who is. When people are, look at for instance the terrorism or insecurity that is happening. Is an aggregation of that expression of disaffection and unhappiness on the part of the population.
All right, then, international affairs analyst Paul Ejime, thank you so much for your thoughts and analysis on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me.
And in South Sudan, continued sub-national conflicts and instability in parts of the country have resulted in a large-scale internal displacement of people. The long-standing economic crisis in the country is also affecting people's ability to access markets, while outbursts of violence are limiting the flow of commercial and humanitarian goods and services. UN humanitarian coordinator Sarah Beselo Inyante leads a high-level delegation to Malakal in South Sudan's Upper Nile state to assess needs on the ground and to meet with people affected by ongoing violence and natural disasters. In Upper Nile state, armed conflict and insecurity make civilians flee their homes, increasing humanitarian needs. Malakal protection of civilian sites is still receiving new arrivals, consisting of people leaving both flooded areas and violence behind.
We've come to Malakal with one objective, and that is to assess the humanitarian situation, to observe for ourselves the context within which our humanitarian actors are working, to be able to identify for ourselves any gaps we have in our implementation of our humanitarian objectives in Malakal.
Humanitarian actors call on the government, development partners and donors to match their solidarity by showing their unwavering support to the people affected by unforgiving circumstances on the ground.
It is something that we cannot be denied it, and we really appreciating that. And also, we encouraging you to do more. We're not leaving to you alone, then we can share it together. So we still need your support.
Humanitarian access and the delivery of essential services including healthcare, education, water, sanitation, protection and legal services remain challenges.
And how we bring the three pieces together. So this was a very important mission in relation to that. And what I see going forward is that we have to shift some of the things we do. I would like to see us doing some shift in terms of localization, working more with local NGOs, but also then with cash, doing more with cash and cash-based initiatives.
This year, some 6.8 million of the most vulnerable people in South Sudan will need urgent life-saving assistance and protection. A $1.7 billion humanitarian response plan for the country is currently only around 8% funded. Now, Ghana's opposition convention People's Party, CPP, has announced plans to rebury the country's founding leader, Kwame Nkrumah, in November. The independence-era ruling party says Mr. Nkrumah wasn't given a fitting burial by the state following his death in April 1972, and that his soul was still restless. Mr. Nkrumah died 50 years ago while being treated in Romania and was buried in his Nkrumah village in southern Ghana. His remains were later transferred to a museum in the capital, Accra. The CPP party says it would soon unveil a timetable of activities that will culminate into Mr. Nkrumah's actual funeral. Now, Algeria has threatened to cut off its gas supply to Spain if any of it ends up in another country that is not specified in the contract. It says supplying the gas to a third destination would be a breach of contract between Algeria's state-owned Sonatrach and its Spanish customer. Spain has confirmed that it plans to ship gas to Morocco, but says that none of that gas will be of Algerian origin. Algeria's threat comes amid a decision by Madrid to supply gas to Morocco in a reverse flow through a pipeline that links Spain via Morocco. The Maghreb-Europe pipeline, through which Morocco also obtained its gas supply, has not been used since October, a few months after Algeria cut diplomatic ties with its neighbor. And volunteers in Sudan are distributing iftar meals to hospital patients, students, the needy and passers-by. It's part of an initiative to offset the impact of prolonged political and economic crisis affecting many in the country.
In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, cooks are whipping up a batch of the popular dish asida. Volunteers like these ones say their work is more necessary than ever as Sudan has spiraled further into economic crisis. One initiative is the Ramadan Iftar project, providing meals to vulnerable people who have largely come from outside the capital. We are a group of volunteers supported by individuals and institutions. We hold daily iftar meals in Ramadan, distributed in several locations. All the youth are volunteers who come daily at a specific time to prepare and pack these meals and then deliver them to target groups.
After the Sudanese revolution, we realized that volunteering is much needed in Sudan. I come here after 2 p.m. and help with preparing iftar meals for hospitals and dormitories where people from other regions stay.
The Ramadan Iftar project delivers around 1,200 meals a day. Nurse Auri Mohammed has just taken a delivery. He says everyone is suffering in Sudan's economic conditions and that the iftar meals really help.
Economic conditions in Sudan are very difficult. Everyone is suffering. The situation is really bad. These iftar meals distributed by the youth help a lot of people, including us. It really helps us.
Sudan's military officials staged a coup last year, plunging the country deeper into political and economic turmoil. The military says the coup was a necessary corrective measure. Since then, protests have taken place despite climbing temperatures, Ramadan fast, and a security crackdown that has claimed the lives of 94 people and injured thousands.
And finally on the programme, power lines are taking a heavy toll on Kenya's birds of prey, whose numbers have plummeted by about 86% over the past 40 years, according to officials who warn that much of the electricity infrastructure that is being installed is not bird safe. The problem has progressively grown as Kenya has upgraded its electricity network, replacing wooden poles with steel reinforced concrete.
So the glue here.
A blindfold calms the large black and white Olga Buzard as two men glue a prosthetic leg into an insert on her body to replace the one that she lost. The female is one of many injured birds of prey that turn up at Simon Thomset's Kenyan Rehabilitation Center, most of which, like her, have been crippled by electrocution.
30 years ago, the birds were coming in with being hit by cars, diseased, fighting with one another, or some accident hitting things like clotheslines, for example, or pane glass windows. Now we're definitely seeing the vast majority is electrocution.
Many are killed outright by the shock, both via direct collision with power lines or from perching, which insulation reduce.
They take into account your area, your species, and your line routing. For lower voltage lines, definitely your structure design. It can be done.
According to a February study by Thomset and others published in Biological Conservation, Kenya's population of Olga buzzards, historically one of its most common birds of prey, has plunged 91% over 40 years due to electrocution, habitat loss, and poisoning. Over the same period, hooded vulture are down 88% and long-crested eagles by 94%, the study said. In some parts of South Africa, bird flight diverters have successfully been introduced to reduce instances of such deaths.
And that's the programme today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shaboale. Bye for now.